tonight's topic is all about that first rifle. It's an elk-only season. We're going to be talking to you about rut conditions, where the animals are at, how you can increase your odds, what he's been saying in the field, what I've been saying in the field. So tonight is all about elk, and it's also about your questions. So this is an engagement with you. You cannot say that we're not involved, because right now you can type your questions and we're going to answer them. Why you get ready to ask these questions, I want you to tell why you've been on the news. What's been going on? You had a crazy elk situation that's been going on for a while. Yep. Walk people through why they've been seeing it.
Yeah, so our officers have been after a bull elk that actually had a trailer tire around its neck.
Full rubber tire.
yeah, going on 2 years now. We first saw him back in the Mount Evans Wilderness in the summer of 2019. This elk actually ended up migrating down towards the foothills in the winter of 2020. With the rut, he kind of migrated back towards the Bailey and Conifer area, and with the rut, obviously their activities become, much more visible, and they just kind of get dumb,
Yeah.
and so the visibility of him was pretty high last year. We made one stock on him. This is not one of the habituated conifer or evergreen elk. I mean, this was as wild as they come, and a
little even more skittish, I'd say, than wild. Like,
yeah,
hard to get close to.
Well, and I mean, he wouldn't even interact with a lot of the cows. I mean, he was kind of like on the outskirts, like even more so than just a normal, satellite.
Okay.
And he was just super skittish, and if you spooked him, he'd be gone for weeks at a time. And in the winter, he'd be gone for 6, 7, 8 months, and we wouldn't get any sightings of him. But the other day, we finally tracked him down, and my partner Dawson was able to get a dart in him. And I helped him, ultimately get that car tire off of that elk. So. Yeah, pretty cool story.
The story behind it, the elk is live and well, so you were able to, again, tranquilize the animal, get the tire off, remove that, and this bull elk is now very happy to roam around without a giant necklace on.
Yep. He's got earrings though now. He's
right.
got some ear tags.
So awesome. Yeah. Just wanted to share that story. It's really neat to see these things that, again, wildlife officers, you have so many roles. I mean, everything from wildlife encounters of bears and mountain lions all summer long where you don't ever sleep, to, working with hunters in the field during hunting season and trainings and everything just with the general public. I think so many people, have an idea of what a wildlife officer does, when in reality, your roles are almost endless. So just need to see, in this situation, it was all about, saving an animal and getting that tire off and letting him lead the wildlife that he normally deserves. So. Awesome. All right, guys, now it's time to talk about elk hunting. Tonight's goal is all about first rifle, but again, it's all about you. We always encourage you, share this feed, tag a buddy. We always say this. We all have a buddy, right, who's maybe not the best hunter. It's hard for us sometimes to give advice to a friend. Now's the time. Tag your friends in this and just say, hey, Jim, maybe you watch this tonight, maybe your odds will come up. So we're going to talk about that, but guys, bring your questions. If we can talk about anything tonight, again, our main focus is elk, but bring your questions. We'll answer them live right now and get that. Whether it's wildlife, laws, anything like that, we're happy to take those questions, so bring those questions live. But Scott, this first rifle season is probably one of my favorite hunts of the entire year because it encompasses everything. So you and I both love archery. We both love muzzleloader. We love hunting the animals in the rut. When they're calling, bugling, you can interact with them. But obviously we're using some primitive weaponry. When you get into the first rifle tag, all of a sudden you're using, high-powered rifles, scoped optics. You kind of have the best opportunity via the tactic of choice as far as how you're going to hunt. The issue is sometimes you lose the rut, but in this first rifle, you necessarily don't. So right now, in most situations, we'll talk about it in a second, but I'm still seeing bulls rutting. I'm hearing them bugle. I'm seeing in big, massive harems, so they're fairly easy to find. So this first rifle tag offers that opportunity of longer range capabilities, scoped optics, the ideal firepower mixed with rut activity, so it can be probably one of the most successful hunts of the year. But we want to talk about how you go into that hunt, how you approach it, because so many hunters, you see it all the time too, where they have one style of hunting. They hike the top of the mountain, they sit and watch, but I want to talk about interacting with more the style of an archery or muzzleloader hunt, to where you listen for bugles, know where they're at. Again, during this rut phase, we talked about the other day, but they'll grow big harems this time of year. So a beginning stage of the rut, a bull might gather a couple cows and he's trying to breed those cows. This time of year, where a good portion of the cows have already been bred, they pull a game of strength in numbers. So these bulls gather massive amounts of cows, big harems, in hopes that 1 in 10 or 1 in 20 might be breedable again. So their goal and efficiency is just to gather as many as possible. So, I mean, what kind of harems are you seeing right now? What size?
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing pretty good size. Just driving through Evergreen the other day, I mean, there was probably a group of 40 or 50 of them, with one large bull. So,
absolutely.
That's pretty cool.
I saw a group the other day that had almost 80 cows, 10 satellites, and 1 herd bull. So, I mean, you're talking, almost 100 animals, which, again, I love, because when I'm looking for one individual bull, he can tuck them into a small valley and hide. When there's 100 of them, they're easier to find. There's a lot of noise, they're bugling, they're cow calling, so there's a lot of opportunity for you, the hunter. So this rifle season, I want a show of hands. Who is a first-time rifle hunter? Give us some high fives on the screen. Let us know who's first rifle hunter. I also want to know who has not been successful, right? We never want to admit this. We always want to have an excuse, but let's face it, we can't always be successful when we go out in the woods, creating a harvest. But with that, we want to give you some tactics to increase your odds. Again, the biggest thing, we want to tell you things to avoid and things to do more of. So, Scott, we haven't practiced, but you go first. Give me some things that are the negatives. What does the common hunter fail at the most? What's the biggest mistakes they make when they approach this first rifle tag?
So I think, I guess in my experience, not preparing yourself, initially. I mean, physical fitness is one thing you can do early on to get yourself into country that you will hold elk. But right, you haven't had hunters in the field for the last 2 weeks going after elk. And so these elk have kind of calmed down. They've kind of gotten back into their patterns of what they would like to do. They're going back to their favorite spots. And so you really should be using, the week ahead of time before the first rifle season to be kind of scouting and figuring out where these animals are. And one of the biggest things I see is people going and marching right through where they would be bedding, where that they've seen elk. If they, folks want to get a close look at these elk or see what kind of bulls are in there, your best chance is observe from a distance. If you're hearing elk in a particular area or seeing elk, just leave them alone. I've had hunts ruined, at points where you end up seeing guys barging through bedding areas or spots where every morning that's where the elk were going. And then all of a sudden, the day before the season, guys are tromping through right where the elk were at, and then of course, obviously, they don't show up. And so, just being careful ahead of the season and doing your homework ahead of time is going to, really help your chances of being successful. Unlike second or third or even fourth rifle season, you're at such an advantage because you've got, multiple weeks to do your scouting ahead of time. And even if you don't or can't get all that much time off, taking the day or two before the season and scouting is going to make your life a lot easier.
You have 3 days. Today is Tuesday. It's Tuesday night. You have Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday before that opener on Saturday. You have 3 days to get done. I couldn't agree more. We've seen a major phase. Obviously, our animals are starting that rut in early September, but they know when there's no pressure. I mean, you look at September, we have some archery hunters in the woods, we have some muzzleloaders, you have people enjoying the amazing weather, looking at fall colors. There's a lot of activity in the fall, and all of a sudden, literally a week and a half ago, you get to that last week in September, the leaves fall off, it gets cold, the hunting seasons wrap up, and all of a sudden, the woods become empty. There's nothing there. The least amount of activity, almost in the entire year, is literally that first week of October, and all of a sudden, the elk just start going almost berserk. They spend more time on their feet. They're bugling. Their patterns are just relentless. So they are in a great pattern, and I couldn't agree more. Take that opportunity, and I don't want to say I blame the TV shows and all this, but we both love hunting backcountry, right? We love getting away from everybody, but right now I see hunters that literally could park their truck, do a 1.5 mile hike, and harvest an elk. But all of a sudden they get there Friday and they're like, we got to go deeper. And like you said, they go right through the elk, trying to go further, and they blow them all out. They're in a pattern. Use it to your advantage. Now, if you scout out and it doesn't work, then go on with your patterns, and then maybe go hunt a little harder on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, towards the middle of the season. But right now, they're in a pattern. Take it to that advantage. And when we say scout, I talk to hunters like, yeah, we went out Friday to scout. Finding your camp cutting firewood isn't scouting. I mean, it's a part of it, but it's not scouting. Get out there. Scout as if you're hunting. If you're planning on hunting 2 miles in, you need to scout 2 miles in. If it's 2 miles, for example, you need to be there at first light, set up. You need to be conscious of your wind. Plan everything accordingly, and that's going to be huge. So again, make sure you scout as hard as you're going to hunt and plan for this hunt. Now, we got a question running in. We're going to jump to these questions. As always, this engagement is about you. So as you have questions, we're answering them live right now, so bring all those questions. Brian, thank you for joining us tonight. What do we got for a question?
Yeah, we got a great question on the topic you're talking about from Alex. He asks, everyone always says to get away from roads, but what if even then there are a lot of hunters in the area? What do you do then? Where do you go to look for bulls?
Excellent. Scott, take a stab at it first.
So obviously, if you've never hunted this particular area, there's a few different resources. All of the wildlife officers answer lots and lots of these questions every year, and certainly our wildlife officers as well as the biologists are awesome resources. If I hunt out of state, guess what? I'm calling the game warden trying to get some information. Don't do this the week before the season because I likely don't have time. But during the summer or after you've drawn your tag, absolutely. Give us a call. We can try and point you in the right direction. Just because you're far from a road doesn't necessarily mean that's the best elk habitat. A lot of times it is, a lot of times it's not. There are little pockets that can be close to the road that can be really good. A general rule of thumb for me is if I have never hunted a unit, I like to be high. I like to be higher than you would think, especially earlier in the seasons. I mean, I've killed bulls 4th season above tree line, and so higher is generally better. It depends obviously on your unit and a lot of dynamics of that, but higher is usually better. And then look at a map and just kind of, what I do is I'll draw a buffer around all of the roads and say, okay, this is where most of the hunting activity is going to be, because really most folks don't go more than a mile or two past a road. Some of that's limitations on ability to pack out that animal. Obviously, if you have horses, you can usually go further in. If you've got a lot of buddies to help you pack an animal out, you can go in further. And so, that's one strategy, but also looking at, how difficult is this terrain to get into? Where are all the access points? If you've got multiple access points into, one basin, I would expect to have more hunters in there. If you've got to hike up and over a ridge to get into a basin, more likely you're not going to see as many hunters. So difficulty in access makes a big difference. Over-the-counter versus limited units can affect the numbers of hunters that you're going to see in an area. When I hunt over-the-counter units, I tend to find myself hunting further back in than I do in limited units. So that's one other consideration.
That's it. I think also on top of that, I mean, like you said, I think getting away from the road is a great idea. Now, I'm saying there's a lot of animals near roads. I'm not saying you're going to road hunt and drive around, but, there's spots where a half mile will get you into some amazing country. Generally speaking, I tend to go further, but the biggest thing, if you started scouting tomorrow and you find a bull, you can take patterns where you're saying this bull tends to bed down at 8 a.m. and this bull tends to get up in the afternoon at 4 p.m. Those are patterns that animal will repeat regardless of where they're at. So, like you said, I literally draw that buffer. So I say zone 1. I find a bull in this canyon where he's at. If, for whatever reason, opening day, that bull gets pushed out of there, I look at a map, look at, Onyx on your phone, look at whatever devices you have, and think to yourself, if he gets pushed from here, it's a game of chess. All he's going to do is take those patterns, take that cows, and fall into the next zone. So I don't let it ruin it. When I see a hunter, moving animals around or animals get blown out, it doesn't even really bother me because I just say, hey, it's not like he's going to the moon. It's not, he's going somewhere. Take the patterns that you learn, look at a map. Every day, these animals are going to have the daily migrations. If you follow the big game hunting series that we've been doing now for 4 months, we talk about the daily patterns a lot, especially in May, June, July when we're scouting. But every day, these animals are going to drink. Every day, they're going to feed, and every day, they're going to bed down. So especially like this first rifle season, you're going to have the more timber, darker timber as they're bedding. They're still going to drink because they're still in that rut phase. So water is a key ingredient to daily migration, and obviously they're going to eat. So you look at a map, you just say, hey, this animal just left here. We know that, one drainage over or a half mile away, there is another pocket that has a valley that has food, water, bed. those animals are going to go right there. They're going to start following their patterns there, and you simply go there to hunt them. So again, even if you're trying to avoid hunters or not, you can always kind of anticipate where the animals are going by their daily needs and just simply take your hunt to them. Last thing I will say, do not ever think that elk won't be in an area. There are no rules. I told a friend this last year, a new hunter, and he's like, well, they should be in the valleys. I said, hey, buddy, hate to say it, this is wild, same as you. There are no rules in hunting. There are areas where I'm like, there is no way a bull's going to be there, and there they are. You and I have both talked about finding bulls, like you said, in the craziest conditions. I mean, you're up looking at mountain goats, and all of a sudden there's a bull elk standing there. There's no such thing as a rule. So sometimes when I'm around a lot of pressured areas, especially in an over-the-counter unit, I will look for the roughest terrain. You look for a rocky cliff, hunters don't go there. We all want to walk through the nice valley on a trail, and we like to stay where we're going and get to this nice, what we consider perfect elk territory. But there's times when I break off, and everybody's gone 3 miles up to this beautiful canyon where it's supposed to be elky, and I got rocks and cliffs and stuff, and it's unbelievable how up there you'll find those bulls. So sometimes looking for the abnormal, rougher terrain can be a shorter distance and a lot of times hold those animals. So again, just keep it in mind, there's no rules where they're going to have to be or where they won't be. So pushing the limits of some rougher terrain gets into some territory that might not be hunted, and a lot of times after some pressure, that's where those animals will end up. So, perfect. All right, let's go to another question.
All right, I got 2 questions that are somewhat related. Scott is asking, what do you think the wildfires have been doing to elk migration? And then related to that, Travis is asking, with the snow coming in this week, will it push the animals from their summer range into transition for winter range?
Oh, I love it. Those are both very good questions. I'm going to jump off of one and I'm going to kick the other one to you. I love hunting burns more than any person in the world.
Besides me.
Besides you, yeah, exactly. So the biggest misconception, a forest burns, and everybody's like, boy, in 3-4 years it's going to be good. Scott and I have both harvested all the elk in that area in those 3-4 years. I would say that the animals return in, days, weeks?
Yeah, days. I mean,
days.
Our caller data showed that even while the fire is burning, they're moving in and amongst a lot of the fire. I mean, after that fire goes out, I mean, there's immediate green up, and there's things in there. The biggest challenge with the fires is not the food, not necessarily the water, it's the security cover. Yeah. And so, when we get these really thick, hot burns that just, nuke everything, the security cover is what's really limiting. Once things start growing up, or if you find a green patch, that's where those animals will bed. But if you get a nice cool burn that's got a lot of patchiness to the forest, I mean, those are ideal. And those animals feel safe with the trees around you because, they feel like they're kind of encapsulated in that habitat, but they've still got tons of food. And the advantage for you as a hunter is now I can see hundreds of yards potentially. And so, they're great spots to hunt.
Fires are absolutely amazing. So a couple of facts about fires. Number one, you talked about immediate growth. So if you get into the true ag part of it, we look at this big green meadow with grass this tall and we're like, what amazing food source. But when you have a new sprout that is this tall, even though they have to feed all day to get that, the nutrition rate is like 300% better. So you get so much more nutrition out of that new, fresh, soft growth than you do even the most grassy fields that you'll ever find. So they seek it out. It's unbelievable how fast they return. So when you talk to people that are worried about burns, those animals migrate back immediately. We also, I talked to Dave at the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation last year. I actually sat down on the data that they did in 3 different states around burns. And they were seeing, because of the nutrition level and the mineral level in that food, they were seeing antler growth up to 30% increase. So if you take the average area that burns, so whether it's a trophy unit or a unit that's never had big bulls, you're seeing on either level, you're seeing about a 30% growth in antler raise per year to an area that might be 5 miles away without the burn. So 1, they come right back to it. 2, it's amazing for the animal's health, both cows and bulls. Their breedability, they take calves better, they birth the calves better. Everything about the nutrition level is through the roof. And like you said, the ground cover is huge, But with that, you can see a burn that'll totally scorch. There's not a tree around, and it's unbelievable how those bulls will find a place to hide. In a burn, not too far from here, there was a time where I was watching these bulls in the morning, and they dropped in this little canyon, and I was waiting for them to come up, trying to figure out where they're going to bed, and they never came back up. I moved around on a spotting scope, looked from afar, and they literally found this gully that, because of no trees, when it rained, it created this sharp cut, and all these animals, 30 animals, piled into literally a 8-foot wide ditch. And they laid down in a ditch, and they were just getting shadows from the side of the ditch, and that's where they spent their days. They are good at life. It's just what they are. But long story short, the burns, I don't think it's going to affect migration. I don't think it's going to affect hunting. I think the biggest struggle with burns, on top of you're trying to find bedding, is access. Obviously, we want safety for everybody. Roads get washed out, timber falling down. Our Forest Service do a good job of trying to protect everybody, make sure everybody's safe. So a lot of times you get road closures. Sometimes they never open again, and or access. So the true issue with burns, animal life's good, food's good. I'd say everything is a positive, other than sometimes access can be a little tougher. So kind of keep that in mind. Now the next question, what was our other question part of that?
The question was about the coming snow. What kind of
Absolutely.
impact will that have on moving from summer range, transitioning into winter range?
Sure. My personal thought on that is really the snow is going to be so negligible, at least in this storm, that it's not going to do anything. I mean, for an elk to really be pushed out of the high elevation, you got to have feet of snow, this one's just not going to do it.
Yes. I mean, my general rule of thumb is the food has to be covered. That's what's going to truly trigger a migration. So you have to have a situation where the snow covers the grass. The grass is no longer eligible, and really, even if it's a soft powder, they'll stay for quite a long time. The only thing that I really see push them out in these early storms is we had a couple of years ago. We had a foot of snow early. It got hot for one day, kind of got soft, and then we got into a deep freeze the next day. So the snow was only a foot deep, but it was hard, and it was making the animals paw through it. They couldn't nose through it, and we saw a little bit of a migration there. But generally speaking, it's not temperature. It's not the actual true snow. It's all about food. So when the food goes away, that's when you see the migration. But the snows that we're getting now, I actually went up to about 14,000 the other day just to try to check things out on my way home, from the mountains. And we had a situation where I had about 7 inches, but the bulls were up there screaming, bugling. There was no issue. So snow, I don't think is going to be a negative effect. The snow, in my opinion, is good for a handful of things. One, it cools things down, great. 2, it makes it quiet to stalk. So if you're going to be pursuing the game, it really helps out with a quieter stalk, which we love. It also makes the animal stand out like a sore thumb. So I can now, where I normally sit behind my spotting scope and glass 3-4 miles, I can glass 5 miles now because they pop. It also leaves a trail. So now I know exactly where they've been, where they're going. So we keep talking about bedding, food, water. Now's the time, if you do run into a track, kind of just take notice. I'm not saying track them down, but watch where they're going. It teaches you so much where the tracks are at. So that's a huge thing. Last thing about it, you are great with thermals. I tend to live by thermals. As a hunter, if I was going to give somebody one piece of advice, is don't get smelled. You can get away making noise. You can get away being a terrible shot. You can overblow on your bugle tube. You can do so many things as a hunter to create failure, but smell will ruin the hunt more than anything. I talk to hunters all the time, they're like, I never get winded. I'm like, the guy who says that gets winded every day. It is what it is. You'll get winded from 1,000 yards away. So playing with thermals is everything. You have to make sure that you control your wind. With that said, having snow on the ground creates a colder thermal, and you have more consistent wind. So when we talk about thermals, generally speaking, in the morning, your thermals or your wind is sucking down. Mid-morning, it switches, comes up. It'll stay there until mid-afternoon, and it'll suck back down. If you have snow on the ground, there's days where you'll have a down thermal all day. So the wind, or the snow, brings on, honestly, a long list of positives for this upcoming hunting season, even down to game care and meat care to have more time to pack it out. So I think the snow coming in is a good thing. We're going to get cold tomorrow. We kind of bounce back up. I don't think we're going to have a major effect. I think they're going to rut right through it. So I think we'll be good there. So again, guys, this question's all about you. We're going to keep talking. We got one more question. Let's answer it.
All right. This is another question. This is from Alex. On topic as well. Does warm or cold weather get them moving around more? I'm assuming talking about during huntable hours, or maybe moving them from one area to another area, kind of moving across the landscape.
So, the colder the weather is, the more those animals have to feed, right? They can't just put on their jacket to stay warm. They've got to consume calories in order to produce heat. And so the colder it is, the more active they are, and obviously, you know, you got to go out into the open to find food. And so, I would much prefer to hunt the colder, the colder the better. Even in archery and muzzleloader season, if I can get snow, that's perfect. They're going to be up and moving, and so, other advantages of the cold and the snow we talked about briefly was the tracking, and I think that's kind of an underutilized tool that folks use. There's always an elk at the end, right? And so if you can be diligent and take your time, it may take you all day to figure out where that's at, but right after that first snow, you may be walking around and there's no tracks, and then all of a sudden you cut one. That track's going to be super fresh, and so that elk's not far away. Just be diligent in tracking that, and they're going to move, and you'll learn how to figure out when that animal's going to start bedding. It's going to meander differently, and it may go into some different habitat, and so you need to be ready. But that cold weather is going to move it into better spots, and they're just going to be out and about. I find also too that however sunny it is, it might be cold out, but if it's super sunny and bright, those animals are also going to bed down quicker than they would if it would have been cloudy, overcast, or even snowing or raining out. So that probably dictates more of their activity than temperature in some ways. 10 or 15 degrees is not really going to make any difference. But if it's sunny one day versus cloudy another, they may stay out for an hour or two later.
I think that's huge. I think the snow is a good thing for daytime activity. Absolutely. I think it extends it, even if it extends it by an hour. I don't think enough hunters realize how quick things can change. And you and I talk about this all the time. We call it a nature walk, but it's so hard. We look forward to these hunting seasons. First rifle is 5 days. So we literally, for 360 days, we look forward to this 5-day stretch. All of a sudden, Saturday comes around, we want to hunt. Now, the biggest thing is once these animals bed down, if you have snow, you can track them all day. If you don't have snow, it's best to leave them in their bed, wait till they start moving that day, or that evening. So don't push the animals if you don't know exactly where they're at. And we talk about this all the time, but there's times where literally it gets, legal shooting line, let's just say it's like 6:40 in the morning, 6:45. And all of a sudden at 7:15, they walk into their beds. I can't tell you how many hunts where I have a half hour or an hour to pursue the game, and at that point in time, they move into their beds. The smartest thing to do, back up and wait till they're out there in the evening. The problem is, we wait 360 days, we are chopped at the bit, and so many hunters push the envelope when they shouldn't, and they blow the animals out just to never see them again. So the snow, even if it extends it a half hour, it's a blessing, and we take it. So the snow, even if it's a short amount of time, is definitely going to increase their amount of time on their feet, out in the open. So yes, the snow is a good thing. Last thing I'm going to throw in there, we're going to talk about this a lot as we talk to other officers, or we talk about our 3rd and 4th rifle hunts, but if you get into enough cold, enough snow, right now we're seeing these animals bed down in dark timber. So they're moving to the dark timber, they're cooling off, they're resting. If you get cold enough and get enough snow, you'll see these animals start to bed down in the open. The biggest trick to this, they still want to feel safe. Safety to them is cover. So right now they're bedding in dark timber. If we get enough cold and enough snow, you'll see them move to an aspen hillside where it's all aspens and they're all straight up. You look across the canyon, you can see them clear as day. The leaves have all fallen off. You're like, buddy, why are you laying there? I can see you. But to them, they have all these trees around them and they still feel safe. So once you get enough cold and enough snow, you'll see them move their bedding grounds from dark timber to more of those open hillsides. Again, they're still going to have cover around them, but they'll be open. So on Saturday, Sunday, if it's still cold, once my animals go down, I know it's 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, once I quit seeing animals on their feet, instead of going back to camp, I'll make sure my wind's good so I'm not blowing anything out. Again, I'm always hunting on the safe side, but I'll go to a hilltop, I'll set my spotting scope, and all day, we have nothing to do, right? I'd rather sit in the woods and have an opportunity than sit in a camper. Yep. So I'll sit on a hilltop, I'm not walking around, I'm not blowing out the elk, but I'll sit with my spotting scope and I'll find an aspen patch and I will pick it apart. I mean, literally tree by tree, 5 foot by 5 foot squares, and I'll pick it apart. It'll blow your mind sometimes if it's cold enough how you'll sometimes find these bulls bedded out in those open sections of ground. So keep that in mind. Just another tip as we talk about tactics for hunting snow and cold. So keep that in mind there. So again, I'm going to ask Scott a couple personal questions now, but again, keep bringing on all your questions. We'd love to answer them. Now, we talked about calling a lot, Scott, when we talked about archery, we talked about muzzleloader, you got bugle tubes, you got cow calls. Now, during the first couple days, these animals are vocal. Sometimes when the rifles start going off, obviously we're on the very tail end of the rut. Sometimes having the hunters, go into the woods will be all it takes to push these animals out. And your biggest bulls are going to be the first to leave. As the maturity level stacks down, it kind of goes in that fashion. Once you get later on in the season, the bulls will leave the cows, and all you'll have is your very immature bulls with the cows. Your bigger bulls will either be independent or in bachelor groups at that point in time. But with that being said, coming up this weekend, there is still opportunity to where you're going to hear these animals being vocal. You're going to be talking. I heard bulls today talking. You heard bulls today talking. I don't want to say that you want to go out there and go crazy on this call, because if you startle them, you get too close, you blow the wrong call at the wrong time, you can ruin your hunt. But when I approach a rifle tag, instead of going into like archery and muzzleloader where I am calling, trying to bring them to me, in a rifle situation, I do not want that. I'm by no means trying to call them in, but I will make a couple sounds to get them to bugle. All I have to do is get them to bugle once, and I'm like, oh, there he is. The second I hear him bugle, I'll take out my map, and I'll say, okay, he's in this valley right here, or he's in this meadow. I know my wind's doing this. Let's get up here, gain some elevation. We'll be within 100 yards, and we can take the shot. So as we approach the season, I encourage hunters, have calls with you. You're not approaching it where you're blowing on these all day long. I'm so shy when I tell people to call, because overcalling can almost be more harmful than not calling at all. But why they're vocal, it can be one of those things that, during archery, I might start calling, well before light, to try to get them pinpointed, and then I start, my pursuit to where it gets first light, I'm close. Rifle hunting, I don't, because, they sound off too much. It doesn't. You don't have to be as close. But with that being said, these are opportunities. The second they're vocal and you hear that bugle, make the most of it. But the biggest thing is to put a plan together. So you go out there Saturday morning, you hear a bugle, literally, instead of just walking right at it and all of a sudden you're close to them or you scare them off, when they have a big harem, like you saw a bull with 40 cows, I saw one with almost 100, that might be a 300-yard circle, and it never fails. I hear the bugle. I don't think I've ever approached a herd of elk where the bull wasn't on one side and the cows were on this side. I hear him bugle, and so I'm like, let's go get him. Yeah. We hike over there, and I take one step, and all of a sudden the calf goes running, the cow goes running the other way, and I blew my opportunity. So again, expect them to be spread out. Assume that it's going to be a bigger harem. So when I call, instead of marching right at him, I'm looking at that map, I'm getting a plan, I'm saying, okay, if he's roughly here, where's he going? So number one, which direction are they moving? And then, hey, how do I get myself to where I don't win them? I'm not going to get in a situation where they blow me, but where I get to a place where I can take a shot. And those are the ways you're going to increase that harvest opportunity and create that success. What are your takes on calls and this first rifle season?
So with first rifle season, I would say that these bulls are much more likely to just round up their cows and leave than they are to come in.
Yep.
And so calling with some sort of intent is huge. I mean, a lot of times people are elk hunting, so what do elk hunters do? Well, we got a call, right? Not necessarily the best option. Some places you can get away with a lot of bugling. The bulls get pretty naive or dumb, I guess, during the rut sometimes, and they'll tolerate bugling. A lot of times these cows will not tolerate any cow calls. And some of the units that I hunt, if you make a cow call, you have just messed up your total hunt, and all of those cows know, and they start headed the other way, and the bull's going to follow. It's really the cows that are kind of running the show than actually the bulls. And so you get one of these old, mature cows, she's heard it all, she's seen it all. You call too close to her harem or that group, and she's off, and you're not going to see that group again. And so, if elk are talking, you have no real need to talk back.
Absolutely.
You need to get within 100, 200, 300 yards of these animals. And so, closing that distance like a bow hunter or a muzzleloader has to is just not necessary. But I would just caution of over-calling, and then just be intentional with your calls. And if you don't know what that area is or how those animals act, it's better to kind of err on the side of not calling. I mean, one area I hunt, in many years of hunting that area, I think I've heard like 3 cow calls ever.
Yeah.
The cows just don't talk. In some of these other units, they'll talk all day long, and you can cow call, and it's no big deal.
Absolutely.
But that's understanding your unit and
Scouting.
Understanding your critters. But yeah, if they're talking, I mean that's the easiest part.
And
They're
I would
telling
say,
you where to go.
I should have mentioned that when I was talking about calling. If they're naturally talking, by no means make a call. Like, there is no reason to raise a red flag. I don't care if you're the world's best caller. If they're naturally talking, just let them continue to talk. It's more if you think they're in the area and it's silent and you're just like, hey, I just need one call. That's where I might do one cow call or one really soft bugle just to see if I can get them to talk. Once I look at them once, I never bugle again. One time. I just need one bugle to say, there's where I am. I look at the map. You can understand when you understand. Rewatch this entire big game hunting series. You say, hey, you learn the bedding, you learn the food. When you see him on a bugle, you're like, hey, pull out the map. Clearly, I know that his bedding grounds are up there. He's going to walk that way. Get into position and take that shot. So keep that in mind. Now, I'm going to ask you a couple other questions, but again, feel free to bring your questions. But as we approach this, obviously I think we got a lot of people, a lot of great tactics on how to do this. I want to talk more on the wildlife side now, on the more the law enforcement. So you're out there, you'll be patrolling this first rifle season. Hunters that, whether we're brand new or seasoned veteran, I don't know enough people that grab that big game brochure and read it through to really understand the laws. And I know this sounds kind of one of those things like, yeah, Nate's just doing fluff, but it's important to understand the legalities. You want, as a hunter, you want to do all of your parts to support conservation, to provide a safe and good hunt. I want to make it easy on you. Same thing. Last thing you want to do is, come out here and have to bust me, right? You want to high five me on a kill. You want to see the tags there, and we want to go on a day. So we both sides want to have a great hunt. What are hunters, you're walking through right now, walk me through some of the things that you see out there as a wildlife officer that maybe people don't do enough of, or things that they forget about as they're leading this hunt, as far as the legalities to have a great hunt.
Sure. So I think there's really a few. One, knowing the area, having maps, knowing the terrain, knowing where private and public land is. Onyx is a great tool. The county assessor's webpage is free. If you want to go onto the county webpage, you can do that. But just knowing the terrain and the surroundings, that's going to help keep you out of trouble in case you do have an animal that either crosses the fence or you see animals that you want to pursue and ultimately ruins your day because you figure out later that they're on the wrong side of the fence. So knowledge of the terrain that you're at. Another one would be, if you do harvest, what are the steps that you need to take to make sure that you've, one, voided your carcass tag correctly. You've got to sign it. You've got to notch it, so notch the date, which is the month and the day, as well as the sex of that animal.
And physically notch it.
Yeah, physically notch it, right? So cut a little triangle out of there.
Or not mark it with a pin. Huge.
So you really permanently voiding that tag, and you've obviously torn it off of that license. That's huge because, most folks, if they make that mistake, it's not an intentional thing. You might get caught up in the moment. But unfortunately, there's folks out there that try to reuse tags over and over. And, how do we delineate, a guy who just makes a mistake versus somebody who's intentional? It gets to be kind of a complex situation. And so we don't want folks to be in that situation. It's super easy. All the instructions are on your carcass tag. So if you forget what I told you, it's all written right there. So avoiding your carcass tag is a big one. And then leaving evidence of sex. Unlike deer or antelope, where most of the time you're taking the entire carcass out of the field, an elk, very seldom do you get to do that. I've killed lots of elk, and I've yet to do that.
Absolutely.
Many of mine. I'm either quartering them, or in some instances, if I'm really far back, they're boned out. And so leaving evidence of sex naturally attached to that carcass is important. I always leave two. Most parts are in pairs, right? So leaving, one set on one side, one set on the other, and that's going to give you, extra in case something happens and you accidentally cut one off or something like that. But leaving evidence of sex naturally attached is important. And what I usually do is I'll just put my carcass tag on that quarter, whatever quarter that I've attached, or left that evidence of sex to. As far as the head, if you've got a nice bull or whatever, generally we tell folks if you've got that other portion of the license, so the top portion that you've torn away from your carcass tag, put that on the head. Then if you take it to the taxidermist can see that, hey, yeah, this animal was legally taken. If you take your meat to a processor, they've got the carcass tag, so everything's accounted for and done there.
The carcass tag has to stay with me. Keep that in mind.
Correct. And you actually want to retain that carcass tag until all that meat's consumed. Right? That's basically what allows you to possess that animal. And I keep all my licenses, I keep all my carcass tags because, right, I've got all these animals in my house now, and I want to be able to prove that, hey, this is the carcass tag for that animal. And, I would say one of the other big things that we run into, and less so in the later rifle seasons, just because you do get the colder weather, but game care is huge. When it's hot, you could potentially get, rot from just the heat, but you can, if you don't have good game bags, you may have, flies laying eggs on your meat, or wasps getting in and eating your meat, or just dirt, and the filth that gets on your meat. And, I personally, I carry a thing where I've got it all vacuum sealed in. I carry 6 game bags. There's a very good reason for that. I've got my 4 quarters, and then I've got all the neck meat, the back straps, the tenderloins, and those usually fill up the 2 spare bags. And so when I end up quartering an elk, I've usually got 6 bags of meat, plus the head and cape or whatever else I need. And so there's a lot there, and just bringing your standard 4 game bags is not enough. And so just being prepared to take care of that meat and understanding what it takes to get an animal out.
And I think preparing for success. I know so many hunters that this might be their first year, might be their 5th year, they've never achieved success. Yep. So all of a sudden when it happens, they're like, what do I do? You see people that are like, oh, I'm going to use a sled or a pack frame, but a plan needs to be well executed where when that animal hits the ground, I know what I do. Like my daily backpack, I know that I can carry out 100 pounds of meat. So whether it's the front shoulder, the rear shoulder, or the neck meat and loins, I take one load out, go into my truck, then I get my bigger pack frame that's more comfortable, and then I continue that process. But having a plan is huge. So whether you've been successful or not being successful, always plan for the harvest and calculate there. Now, with that being said, I had a question earlier in a private message. People were saying, hey, in the event of a debone or a quartering, I'm a brand new hunter, but I am going to go deeper into the woods. They want to know what you're taking out. Obviously, we're taking out all edible portions, but walk people through, more on that side of things. What are we taking out on enough?
Yeah, so by the letter of the law, you're required to take out the 4 quarters, the back straps, and the tenderloin. Anyone who's killed an elk, in particular a bull, knows you're going to get massive amounts of meat off the other portions of the animal that are not legally required, such as the neck, and the brisket and stuff like that. I mean, you may get another, 60 plus pounds of meat just off the neck. So obviously, the trophy is a fun part of the hunt, but that's not really the ultimate reason why we're out there. And the meat and game care is critical, and so being able to make sure that you get the required amount plus the remaining stuff is huge.
Absolutely. So just keep that in mind. Keep all those edible portions, and you want that meat. Again, that's the true reward of the whole thing, that you're gonna, the organic meat that you're living on from that point in time. And again, have a plan. With the plan, I also have to throw this out there. I've talked to multiple, meat services, we'll call them, like your butcher, throughout town. We're good friends with a couple of them down here in town. And a lot of these services, still due to COVID, a lot of them have still been so busy with lacking staff that you have to have appointments or whatever the case may be. If you're going out for this first rifle hunt, call your local butcher and just say, hey, are you open? Okay, perfect. You're open. Now, how do you want my meat? Is this a thing that I need to make an appointment now? Is this a situation to where I need to plan for it? How do you want my meat? Do you take boned out meat? Do you take quarters? Obviously, we want it skinned. But having a plan is a big portion of that. So whether you butcher the meat yourself or you're taking it to a butcher, plan for success, make those calls now. We even say call your taxidermist. If you're thinking you want to have a memory, whether it is a rug, whether it's a European mount, whether it's a full shoulder mount, there's a lot of cool stuff you can do with them. But again, everything requires different cuts. Everything requires different care. So call those people now. Get a plan. That way when that animal hits the ground, you're like, hey, we're doing this to it. Here's the plan with the meat. Here's the plan with the other portions. Let's execute accordingly to make sure we make the most of it.
Yeah. And just having good, just backups too. I mean, you may plan on having access to a horse in this particular area, and then all of a sudden you kill an elk in a different area, and all of a sudden, that option is out of the window now. And so you may have to backpack it out or pull it on a sled. I mean, I use horses a lot, but I also have my bike in the back of my truck. I've got, the wagon, or not the wagon, but the game cart. I've got other options just in case.
You'll always be prepared. So keep that in mind. Guys, we're going to take one more question, then we're going to start wrapping it up for the evening.
All right. So this question, I think, Scott, you can talk about points restrictions for bulls in some units. And the question itself is, why is there a point restriction on bulls and over-the-counter units? But please share what point restrictions are and how you know if you're hunting in a unit that requires them.
Sure. So in our big game brochure, there are specific units that are listed. And so it's real explicit on, hey, this unit has a point restriction for bull elk. That point restriction is 4 points or a 5-inch brow tine. And so just going back to basic biology, a cow gives birth to a calf. That first year that animal doesn't have any antlers. When it turns basically, the first hunting season, I guess the second hunting season for it, so when that animal's a year and a half, it's generally going to be a spike. So it's going to have, 2 12 to 18-inch spikes out of its head. That's going to be a year and a half old animal. Super naive, generally hanging out with cow herds. You can call them in, but generally harvest on those can be pretty high. As a 2.5-year-old bull, that's usually when they start branching out. And so we've got a branched antlered bull. They can be 3x3s, 4x4s, 5x5s. It kind of varies. Most of the time they're going to be like a 4x4, but they're going to have those brow tines. And so those brow tines, for the most part, you're going to see are going to meet that requirement if it's a 2.5-year-old bull. And so one of the ways that we manage, not only for opportunity, but also for a little bit of quality in these over-the-counter units, is by restricting some of the take of these spiked bull elk, because they are so naive when they're that young. And so it gives them just an extra year of growth. They're a little bit more appealing to a hunter to have a branched antlered bull, and they've got one more hunting season under their belts, and then it can be a little bit more challenging at hunt.
And just to make it clear, the spike is not a legal bull in a point restricted unit. So again, that brow tine, that 5-inch brow tine, is your beam with a point coming off that beam. So the main spike, even though it's a single tine, that is not a brow tine, that is not a 4-point, obviously. So again, keep that in mind. And in general rules of thumb, you can always measure from the eye to the nose to get rough measurements, or the ear to understand that. But it's fairly rare to have one under 5 inches as far as once they have brow tines, they're usually there. Yep. You will see in great genetic units spikes that go up and have like 2 or 3 on top, but it's not a actual branch antler. It is clearly a spike that might split or something. But again, that's not going to qualify in those units. That is going to require a point restriction, so keep that in mind. So, guys, we're joined tonight with Officer Scott Murdoch from Colorado Parks and Wildlife. We're going to start wrapping this up. We have to give a quick shout out. Number one, to all the brand new hunters out here. This is the Big Game Hunting Series. We started this process back in February with selecting the right unit, how to apply for limited licenses. We walked you through the secondary draw. We've walked you through the entire scouting process through all legal methods of take. So if you're new to this and you've liked this feed, go back. It's on our YouTube page. It's on these feeds. We can drop the comments here. We can drop the link to this. But the entire series is now logged. So if you like it and you're a brand new hunter and you're saying, hey, this is a great step in the right direction to be successful, go back and watch this whole series. We will walk you through the entire process. I promise you can have never even thought about hunting, and by following this series, we'll walk you through it. Brian behind the camera also has got an amazing hunting series. We've got a lot of education on our YouTube page to walk you through all the ins and outs of hunting big game in Colorado. With that being said, we have another live feed coming up. So again, roughly speaking, 3 to 5 days prior to all of these rifle seasons, we are going to be going live. So in the next one that we talk about second rifle is actually a combined deer and elk. So we're going to be talking about all the opportunities of hunting elk and deer, especially as we move into a post-rut stage. So that next live feed is going to be as the bulls start to separate. There's a lot of changes that come in second rifle, so we'll be talking about that. As we get into third rifle, we're going to start talking about the increased activity of rut in the mule deer behavior as well as some whitetail behavior. And then lastly, our fourth rifle, we're going to talk about elk, talk about major winter migrations of the elk, but more so talk about what is probably going to go down as one of the best deer seasons of all time history, the fact that it is so late in the year. So we'll have a live feed on all of those hunts, so mark the calendars. You can go up here and see all these events as they come, but roughly speaking, the week prior to each of the big game hunting seasons, we're going to be going live, bringing you all that information, so stay tuned for that. Again, it's all about you, our listeners. Now, if you're watching this after the fact, watching it in the next several days, obviously we won't be live. You are still feel free to drop in comments. We monitor these comments and we'll bring them up in the next live feed. So if you're watching this, even though it might not be live, make sure you bring your questions. As always, we love having you. Scott, thank you so much for coming on tonight. Congratulations on your successful hunting season, and also just great work on helping out that elk with the tire. We talked about at the beginning. If you're watching it now, follow this story where again, Scott Murdoch here, as well as Dawson Swanson, had a great recovery of a bull elk with a tire on its neck. So check that story out. As always, guys, my name is Nate Zelinsky, your host of the Big Game Hunting Series, proudly brought to you by Colorado Parks and Wildlife. We'll see you next time.